Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast for 25th August 2022. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Mark, greetings from Montreal, Canada. I'm Peter Ryan, and it is great to be with you this week.
Well, I know that this week we're talking about careers in CX and the management of CX talent. So why don't you introduce the next guest?
Yeah, Mark, over the course of the past few months, I've been trying to conduct an interview with Indu Badlani, who is based in Manila. Now, she is the co-founder of StaffingExpert. Indu is a very busy lady, and I was really fortunate to be able to get 30 minutes of her time most recently while she was visiting the United States. We were able to align time zones, which was really handy. As you know, the 12-hour time difference between the Philippines and the East Coast of North America can be a bit challenging, but Indu was a great interview. We talked a lot about staffing and talent management from the perspective of what's happening in the Philippines right now. And Indu was very, very upfront about the fact that the Philippines has been and remains a very choice location for English language support. And the demand from North America, from the UK, from Australia and New Zealand has been very consistent, and it's growing. That brings with it its own challenges. Certainly there is a lot of opportunities, but the challenges in terms of managing this demand has been quite something. One of the things that really struck me about the chat with Indu was the fact that a lot of the elements around staffing and the elements that staffing members are looking for to work in a CX operation in the Philippines are mirroring what we're seeing in more developed demand economies. They're looking not just for a certain amount of money or for base benefits, but they're looking for career opportunities. They're looking for education and training opportunities. They're looking for almost a tailored, holistic program about how they can move forward as somebody who wants to make a career in CX. So certainly a fascinating discussion with somebody who has got their finger on the pulse of what's going on in talent management.
Yeah, and on that subject of the time zones, we had Tony Wan on the podcast about 3 weeks ago, and I actually had to do a call at 4 a.m. to talk to him because he was actually in South Korea. You try getting South Korea aligned with Brazil, it's not much fun.
Well, Mark, your dedication to the CX Files knows no bounds, and apparently your alarm clock radio knows no bounds either. You're a better man than I. But as we look at what's happening with the element about staffing and managing talent, being able to manage recruitment and retention, these have always been challenges in any CX operation. And I don't care what country or what city you've been in, this remains one of the biggest obstacles in terms of maximizing efficiency. And one of the things that Indu talks a little bit about is a blueprint for what organizations need to think about, whether it be in the Philippines or elsewhere, in regards to making sure that you're able to find the best talent and keep them happy working in the CX environment. There's no magic bullet, but what there is are some really straightforward ideas and some really straightforward concepts that forward-looking organizations need to keep in mind as they're looking to try and undertake to find and keep the best talent possible on the front lines.
Yeah, I think that this reflects something that we're seeing happening across the industry, and that is that we're moving away from this idea of the entry into CX always being at an agent level, always being a transient job that you're only going to do it temporarily while you can't find something else to do, and I think that the whole industry is maturing. There are pathways to bigger careers. And often it can be really helpful to have had that experience of being on the front line, actually knowing what it's like to talk to customers. If you move off into an area such as marketing or sales, having that kind of direct experience with customers is really, really valuable.
Well, let's find out a little bit more in these topics, as well as many more, as we prepare to chat with Indu Badlani. The CX Files is really excited this week to be chatting with Indu Badlani, who is with StaffingExpert. And Indu has taken some time out of her very busy schedule while she's in New York to have a discussion about some of the key elements going on with regards to recruitment, retention, and all things CS staffing as it relates to the contact center space. Now, Indu, as I mentioned, you're in New York right now, but why don't you tell us where you're usually based?
Well, hi, Peter. Yes, I'm in New York City, but I'm currently, based off of the Philippines, Manila, Philippines, where our customer service operation is held.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, welcome to this side of the pond. It's great to have you here, albeit there's a border between where I am in Canada and where you are in NYC. But, you know, we're friends on both sides of the 49th parallel. So it's really exciting to be chatting with you a little bit about what's going on in regards to talent management, specifically for the CX sector. And well, I think the CX Files has had a lot of discussions with people talking about what's happening in the context of North America, as well as what's happening in Western Europe. We haven't had a lot of discussion from a talent management standpoint as what's going on in some of the major offshore destinations, and obviously the Philippines is one of them. As a good starting point, as an element of reference, Indu, would you be able to talk to us a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on the Philippines CX talent space? What were some of the key dynamics over the course of the COVID-19 period?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, regardless of the pandemic, the Philippines still remains the top destination for CX service. I think the pandemic tested our strength and BCP readiness, in fact. As you can see, this clearly defines that we are a country of culture of operational management excellence. So really the key impact initially was really the change in overall operations, the core operations, the shift, to work from home, management of technology, employee overall performance, quality of output. All of these were uncertain at this time, as we all know. But what was important really was that companies were able to sort of utilize tools for a basis of engagement, monitoring, compensation, that were able to support the core, which are the employees or the customer service representatives. Really, in this case, in the pandemic, a shout out goes to a lot of the management and business leaders who are ready to unlearn and learn. Personally, the pandemic encouraged me to entertain a lot of these sales calls or product review and tools that can enhance and support overall business growth. And this is exactly why the Philippines still remains to be the top destination for customer service.
Well, I think a lot of my clients in South Africa, India, Mexico, and Jamaica might debate that top element, but we're all biased towards one side or the other. But that raises an interesting question, Indu, from the standpoint of talent management for the English language major sourcing markets, and I'm thinking the US, the UK, Australia, Canada. The demand is massive right now. And obviously it's very, very tough to find people on the ground domestically that are willing to work in CX or willing to spend a lot of time working in CX. Can you talk to me about where we are in 2022 and what are some of the unique challenges that are being faced in the Philippines right now from the perspective of both recruitment and retention for the contact center element?
Oh, definitely. So, yes, you are right. There is a great demand for offshore talent, and it's been heightened, especially during the pandemic. So, again, the Philippines has the advantage because of its English proficiency and culture adaptability. But now, as we're now moving into a more of an employee market, especially here in the Philippines, I only know to speak from the Philippines perspective, it's said that about 4 out of 10 Filipino millennial workers resign from their employment, say, every 2 years. And as we all know, millennials are now the larger group of professionals in the workforce. I actually recently read an article that was very interesting that outlined that the key to retaining young workers is better onboarding. Employees get a sense of company culture, career progression, and workplace at that initial instance.
Okay, that's interesting. So then really they're focusing on career progression and what they'll be able to do over the long term when they're going out shopping for a role. And that's the younger millennials in the Philippines. They're prioritizing this when they're looking to try and differentiate between working for one CX operation versus another.
Oh, definitely, because with growth comes better compensation, and as they're all more aware now through various social media platforms of what's out there, and to be honest as well, a lot of them are doing their own self-learning, which is something that we admire, actually.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what you're describing, Indu, is very similar to what I'm hearing in a lot of the demand markets whereas a few years ago, I think we can all agree that somebody would require some money or they'd require a salary for at least a little bit. They'd be happy to go work in a contact center for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months until potentially something more rewarding or more career focused would come up. But now the dynamic seems to be that if a contact center or a CX operation, whether it's a BPO or whether it's an in-house operator, really want to find that talent, they've got to be able to demonstrate from the outset what they're going to do to help the individual progress in a career fashion. They might start on the front lines, but what can they do to really fulfill their objectives and their goals career-wise?
Exactly. I mean, to keep them driven, there has to be targets. So what are those targets? Are they defined earlier on the onboarding stage? Because that's what then excites them and gives them the idea that the company is in it for their growth, as opposed to simply filling in that seat for the end user.
A few years ago, I remember it was a big differentiator for a CX operation, whether it was an in-house captive or a BPO, to be able to say to potential recruits, not only will you be coming to work in our contact center and our contact center is doing it better than anybody, but you're going to be working to support end users that are based overseas. In the Philippines today, how much of that is a differentiator, the willingness of new agents to potentially come work for a CX operation, knowing that they're going to be speaking on a regular basis with Americans or Canadians or people from the UK, Australia?
Personally, from my feedback from our current operations and teams is that it excites them. That's what drives their engagement level. They learn more. For instance, they're able to know locations in the United States if they're, sort of doing delivery support, or they're able to learn about, the events and activities or games that are ongoing if they're doing customer service for a lot of this entertainment sites. So for them, it's definitely engaging. It's definitely exciting. And that's partly probably why they're actually also willing to stay up late and do the night shift.
Yeah, and I think for people that don't know the dynamic in the Philippines about how the contact center industry is literally a 24/7 undertaking, and until you actually go, you don't realize it. And I remember on visits I've made to the Philippines, it always blew me out of the water how you would be going to have your dinner at breakfast time in the hotel, about how you would be waking up at 6 p.m. to go to work as opposed to 6 a.m. It's really quite something. And until you actually experience it, it's just, I think, something that you're not going to understand.
Oh yeah, definitely. And really when we're recruiting as well, we clearly ask them, is this something you're comfortable with? And I would say 90% of the time they say, yes, this is what we want. It's the quiet time of the night. I'm able to be productive without any distraction, and I'm able to learn, grow, and be inspired.
And I think that's really some of the facets that the agent community, whether in the Philippines or anywhere else, really are looking for, to be inspired and to be able to grow. So from your perspective then, having worked in talent management for a long time, what would you suggest the BPO community as well as the captive CX operations look at from the perspective of what benefits they're going to be offering agents? What are they going to be able to offer them to come into work in the center and to stay? What would you say would be the core things they need to be focused on in this regard?
Would you mean this is for the BPO company themselves or the employees?
What do the operators need to offer the employees in terms of making them want to stay? What are some of the benefits they should be looking at?
Oh, definitely. So benefits are obviously defined by law. However, what really works even better is that if the employees have the bandwidth to discuss with the employer the benefits that would benefit them. This personal touch request goes a
Yeah.
long way based on my experience. But overall, again, it's really what's in it for me. How can I feel valued? Can my employer give me that added value or that personal touch to make me want to stay?
So looking at it long term then, Indu, what would you say if you're a captive operator or you're working in recruitment for an outsourcer would be the best source with which to find the agent community? Where should they be looking? Is it university recruitment offices? Is it online? Is it using social network platforms?
Oh, definitely. So this is a great question, and I think it differentiates in every country and maybe in some cities as well. But for the
Mhm.
most part, here in the Philippines, we have no shortages on job portals. We have a ton of popular job portals. However, to be very transparent, social media is one of the best recruitment tools in the country. And most of the employees, they actively participate in industry specific Facebook groups and pages. The country is generally extremely socially savvy and engaged, so they feel comfortable finding you know prospect jobs or prospect recruiters in these social platforms. Now, what works better, for instance, for our operations, I would say, is a referral program. This has shown to be more promising for the employee and employer because that initial confidence has already been built. So
Mhm.
this sort of helps us with that case of retention and recruitment process. But although, I mean, ideally, I believe the future is really data driven for recruitment. I believe it's imperative for HR managers to learn how to effectively use data, to generate the outcome they would like. But I believe right now it's probably under 10% that HR professionals are actually using data driven for recruitment.
Interesting. Well, definitely some major changes when we consider how recruitment was done even a few years ago versus how it is today. And really, I think where it's going, as you mentioned, the application of data and being able to leverage data in the recruitment process is really going to be a game changer going forward.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we've been using data itself. So, what we do is understanding what differentiates us from other employers, and the best way to ask is our own employees. So we
Mhm.
do data gathering and surveys within our operations because we want to understand what will make them stay and what got them into the door. You know,
Yeah.
and it's very different, actually. It has changed over the past couple of years. Um, One being because now that the workforce is more millennial based, and obviously to the outcomes and perceptions of what the pandemic has had an impact on the workforce generally. Um, so I'll be willing to share some of the differentiators, especially for our company. Really, the first thing is competitive pay packages. So
Mhm.
now people want to be like, am I earning what I'm worth? Um, do am I getting what I deserve based on my delivery and output? So people are able to know now what they stand for. Number two would be transparent management. So is my role defined? Like we talked about earlier, is my growth potential outlined? Am I able to reach out and tell you what benefits I need? So similarly to what we discussed earlier as well. And lastly, it's really the inspiring company culture. So you don't have to be a big name brand anymore. I think excitement of diversity, feeling valued, therefore I'm inspired, is really what the new generation or the millennials are looking for.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that you touched on that last point. It's the culture. And whereas I think definitely a few years ago, the ability to work for a major brand or to know that you're supporting a major brand would have been a massive differentiator. I'm not saying it isn't to this day, but it's not as much of one. People want to be able to work in a culture and an atmosphere where they're going to feel appreciated and where they are going to feel that there's almost like an environment of positivity. So I think you're spot on with that. That's exactly what we're picking up on in our research, no matter what the different geographic location or the industry.
Oh, definitely. And prior to this, it was really like working for the large conglomerates, having that job security because of the fear of unknown, or what employee programs will you give me, like team buildings and activities and incentives. It's totally shift. And it's like partly I said the new workforce coming in, and also the shift of the pandemic on people's mindsets.
Yeah, and I take it back to my time when I was graduating from my MBA, going back in the late 1990s, and the big focus that most people had was getting recruited by some big company that you fully expected was going to work you to death for probably the next 3 to 4 years until you got your feet wet and got some confidence and you would move into something else. And it was very clear that around the turn of the century, the younger people coming out of university, going into the labor force, didn't want that in terms of a career. They didn't want to start their careers that way. They were looking for a more amenable culture. They were looking for more positivity and a nice work-life balance. And it sounds to me that this has just permeated over the course of the past 20 some years, and certainly infiltrated the contact center and CX space in that regard.
Definitely. I think the key word there is the work balance.
Yeah.
That's been something that, the millennials or even everyone else now is realizing the importance. And what's even more exciting is that, people are engaging in different activities outside of work that generally allows them to give greater output.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Indu, it has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. Thanks for taking some time while you're traveling to join us on the CX Files, and we look forward to having you back on very soon.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much as well, Peter. I mean, I'm glad that we're able to share our experiences. StaffingExpert is a growing company, and we're excited that we have a lot of these supporters.
Absolutely. Well, good luck and safe travels as you move forward.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.